Years later, the people of Alderwick would remember the winter when a penniless widow challenged the man who controlled every nursery and seed merchant in the county. But in December 1886, Evelyn Marlowe possessed only a ruined cottage, a collapsing glasshouse, and 6 shillings in her purse. Her eviction began before the flowers on her husband's coffin had wilted. Arthur's mother arrived at the rented townhouse on the morning after the funeral, accompanied by his elder brother, Charles, and 2 servants carrying inventory books. Lady Honora Marlowe wore mourning silk without a crease, and spoke as though Evelyn were another household account requiring closure. "The lease belongs to the family settlement," she said. "Charles will assume it on Monday." Evelyn looked at the drawing-room chairs where she had spent 3 months nursing Arthur through pneumonia. "Where am I expected to go?" "You have been provided for." Charles opened an inventory and began marking the furniture. The walnut desk belonged to the family. So did the dining table, the silver, the carpets, and the bed in which Arthur had died. Even the greenhouse plants Evelyn had tended behind the kitchen were listed as part of the property. Lady Honora permitted her to keep her clothing, a small sewing box, and Arthur's framed photograph. "The solicitor will explain the remainder," she said. The remainder stood 3 miles beyond Alderwick. Briarbank Nursery, an abandoned commercial garden containing a roofless cottage, 2 overgrown acres, and a glasshouse damaged by a fallen beech limb 7 winters earlier. Arthur had purchased the property cheaply from a failed creditor. His family had never visited it. In his will, signed during the first week of his illness, he left Briarbank to Evelyn outright. Mr. Pell, the solicitor, pushed the deed across his desk with visible reluctance. "There are unpaid parish rates amounting to £2.14, he said. "The glasshouse has been declared unsafe, and the western wall may encroach upon neighboring land. What is the property worth? As building land? Very little. Demolition might cost more than a purchaser would pay." Charles smiled. Arthur was always sentimental. Evelyn placed both hands in her lap, so they would not see them tremble. "May I sell it? If you find a buyer willing to accept the liabilities." Lady Honora leaned closer. "Sign the deed back to the family, and I will arrange a position for you as companion to Mrs. Deverell. She requires someone quiet, grateful, dependent upon the same people who had counted the blankets while Arthur's room still smelled of medicine." Evelyn looked at the brass key beside the deed. Her mother had taught her that damaged plants were not saved by pity. One cut away rot, found living wood, and gave the roots what they required. Beatrice Hale had been a gifted propagator before respectable nurserymen began calling her methods improper and her ambitions unnatural. She had taught Evelyn to graft roses when she was 9, then disappeared 2 years later without explanation. Evelyn still carried her mother's narrow grafting knife. Its wooden handle bore a crescent cut made by Beatrice's thumbnail whenever she completed a successful union. "I will keep Briarbank," Evelyn said. Lady Honora's expression hardened. "Do not return to us when winter proves stronger than pride." By dusk, Evelyn's possessions had been reduced to 1 trunk and a carpet bag. A cab carried her as far as Alderwick, but the driver refused the rutted lane leading to Briarbank. She walked the final mile through falling snow, dragging her trunk whenever its small wheels caught in frozen mud. The nursery appeared beyond a leaning gate. Dead hedges enclosed a cottage, with half its roof missing. Rows of clay pots lay overturned beneath weeds. Behind them stretched the glasshouse, longer than Evelyn expected, and bowed at the center beneath the fallen beech limb. Hundreds of panes were broken. Snow had entered freely, whitening the benches and tiled floor. No building that exposed could shelter a living rose. Evelyn unlocked the cottage first. The front room smelled of damp plaster and mice. Its grate was blocked, its pump frozen, and its only intact window faced north. She had neither coal nor food enough for more than 2 days. Still, the chimney wall was sound. One corner of the roof remained dry. The pump might yield water if she thawed it gradually, rather than forcing the handle. She set down her trunk. Before darkness closed completely, Evelyn walked to the glasshouse. She wanted to judge which section could be isolated with canvas and whether any tools remained. A flash of red stopped her. Deep beneath the collapsed roof, sheltered by an overturned forcing frame, a single rose bloomed above the snow. Its petals were dark crimson, its leaves green and unwilted. Evelyn knelt, brushed frost from the stem, and found a graft union no commercial nurseryman would have made. The cut curved like a narrow moon. Her mother's mark, a metallic snap, sounded behind her. Evelyn turned toward the gate. The chain she had secured minutes earlier now hung severed from its post. A man in a dark green coat stood beyond it, holding a leather document case. "Mrs. Marlowe," he called, "Sir Rowland Vane will clear every debt attached to Briarbank. In return, you will surrender the property and whatever you have just found." The man's confidence unsettled Evelyn more than the severed chain. He stepped through the gate without waiting for permission. He was narrow-faced, neatly bearded, and dressed too well for the muddy lane. "Gideon Price," he said. "I manage certain acquisitions for Sir Rowland." How did Sir Rowland learn that Briarbank was mine? Property transfers are not secrets. The will was read this afternoon. Price smiled. Sir Rowland plans ahead. He opened the document case and produced a prepared agreement. In exchange for the deed, Vane would pay the overdue rates and give Evelyn £15. It was enough to rent a room for several months, purchase mourning clothes, and delay the humiliation Lady Honora expected. Evelyn kept her hands away from the paper. Why does Sir Rowland want a worthless nursery? The land borders his experimental gardens. Then he wants the land. He wants an uncomplicated purchase. And whatever I found? Price glanced toward the glasshouse. Briarbank contains plant material that may have originated on Sir Rowland's property. You would be wise not to mistake possession for ownership. The threat was wrapped in courtesy, but it remained a threat. I will examine the deed and the plants before discussing any sale. You have until noon tomorrow. I have as long as the law permits. Price returned the agreement to his case. As he passed the broken chain, Evelyn noticed a pair of pruning shears beneath his coat. Their jaws carried bright filings, as though recently forced through metal. She waited until he disappeared beyond the lane, then carried the rose into the cottage. The forcing frame beneath which it had grown was small enough to move, though the rootstock itself remained planted in a raised brick bed. Evelyn covered it with her cloak and blocked the glasshouse door with a fallen bench. The cottage offered no true safety. She spent an hour clearing soot and nesting straw from the chimney, then burned dead branches cut from the orchard. Smoke still leaked into the room, but the fire held. She ate the last bread from her journey and slept in her dress beside the grate, waking whenever wind moved through the broken roof. By morning, frost coated the inside of the window. Evelyn had 5 shillings and 7 pence remaining. She walked to Alderwick, carrying a basket and Arthur's old wool scarf wrapped twice around her neck. The village square contained a church, a public house, and 3 shops gathered around a stone pump. Beyond the rooftops, long ranges of glass glittered on a south-facing hill. A painted board identified them as Vane's Imperial Nurseries. At the grocer's, Evelyn requested oatmeal, candles, salt, paraffin, and the smallest quantity of coal that could be delivered. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Rudge, totaled the purchase before asking Evelyn's name. When she heard it, her pencil stopped. "Marlowe of Briarbank?" "Yes. You will pay now." "I intended to." Mrs. Rudge accepted the coins but refused delivery. No carter, she said, would take a load down the nursery lane in snow. A laborer standing near the stove looked at Evelyn's muddy hem. Sir Rowland offered to buy that ruin years ago. Old owner would not sell. Who was the old owner? The man turned back to the fire. Mrs. Rudge tied Evelyn's oatmeal in brown paper. People who work for Vane do not discuss his affairs. Nearly half the village, Evelyn soon discovered, worked for him. His nurseries employed gardeners, packers, carters, printers, and girls who folded seed envelopes. Even those outside his wages depended upon his custom. At the coal yard, the merchant quoted twice the usual delivery price. Evelyn purchased only what she could carry in a sack. An elderly woman selling apples watched her struggle. "You are Beatrice Hale's girl," she said. Evelyn nearly dropped the coal. "You knew my mother?" "I knew what they called her after Vane accused her. Sir Roland?" "His father." Roland learned the story well enough. Before Evelyn could ask more, the woman gathered her basket and moved away, frightened by her own words. Evelyn returned to Briarbank after noon. Price had not come back, but fresh boot marks crossed the lane outside the gate. Someone had tested the cottage door and circled the glasshouse. Inside, the rose remained untouched. Evelyn removed her cloak and examined it in daylight. The lower stalk was thick and scarred, old enough to have survived 20 winters. Its bark showed the crescent mark she remembered, but the flowering cane above it was young. She opened her mother's grafting knife and gently scraped a thread of wax from the union. The wax was soft beneath its weathered surface. The binding twine had faded only on the side facing the sun. New callus had formed, but it had not yet hardened. This graft had been made in late summer, no more than 4 months earlier. The crescent was not merely an old mark preserved from her childhood. Someone had recently repeated Beatrice Hale's private method with expert precision. Evelyn looked across the abandoned glasshouse. Beneath one bench lay freshly cut straw. A clay watering pot contained ice no thicker than a single night. Briarbank had not been empty before she arrived, and whoever had tended the rose knew a secret her mother had shared with no one but her daughter. Evelyn spent the rest of the afternoon searching for signs of the unknown gardener. The boot marks ended near the western wall, where ivy concealed a narrow service gate rusted shut. No tools remained nearby, but someone had recently cleared dead leaves from the hinge. Evelyn tied a thread across the gate, and another inside the main glasshouse door. If either entrance moved during the night, she would know. Then she turned to survival. The cottage's north room could not be saved before spring. Its ceiling had fallen, and snow lay across the floorboards. The smaller south room remained structurally sound except for 2 holes in the roof. Evelyn covered them from inside with boards salvaged from a potting shed, then stretched oilcloth beneath the rafters to catch the drips. She cleared the grate properly, carried in dead apple wood, and dragged a horsehair mattress away from the damp wall. By evening, the room contained a fire, a dry sleeping corner, and a table made from 2 trestles and an old greenhouse door. It was not comfortable, but it no longer felt borrowed. The following morning, Evelyn examined the nursery in daylight. Beneath the weeds, she found 6 apple trees, 3 pear trees, currant bushes, and rows of dormant gooseberries. Most had been neglected rather than killed. One apple tree had split under the weight of snow, yet green cambium remained beneath the torn bark. She trimmed the fracture, brought the 2 sides together with cloth binding, and sealed the exposed wood with grafting wax from her mother's tin. The work steadied her. A plant could not flatter, deceive, or pity. It answered only to what had actually been done. Near noon, someone knocked on the cottage door. The elderly apple seller from the village stood outside with a handcart carrying Evelyn's coal sack and a bundle of kindling. "My name is Miriam Baines," she said. "I should not have left you to carry that load." Evelyn stepped aside. "Come warm yourself." Miriam hesitated before entering, as though crossing the threshold might be reported to someone. She accepted tea made weak from Evelyn's remaining leaves and kept both hands around the cup. "You asked about your mother," she said. "Yes. I packed cuttings at Vane's nursery when Beatrice Hale worked there. She could make a failed graft live when men with certificates had given it up." Why was she accused? Miriam stared into the fire. Sir Rowland's father said she stole a valuable rose and destroyed his breeding records. After that, no respectable nursery would employ her. Did you believe him? I believed what was safest. The honesty hurt more than an excuse would have. Miriam looked toward the glasshouse window. Is something alive in there? Evelyn did not answer immediately. Trust offered too quickly could be another kind of hunger. Someone has been tending the property, she said. Do you know who? No. Briarbank belonged to a retired physician named Dr. Sayer until his debts forced the sale. He kept no gardener after his wife died. Did he know my mother? Not that I heard. Evelyn watched Miriam's face. The woman was afraid, but not surprised by the rose. My roof requires laths, Evelyn said. I have no money to waste, but the orchard contains stock worth saving. If I repair your oldest apple tree, will you help me carry materials from the village? Miriam considered. The tree has not fruited properly in 5 years. Then I must inspect it before promising anything. A small smile appeared. You are Beatrice's daughter. They walked to Miriam's cottage that afternoon. Her apple tree suffered from crossed branches, canker on one limb, and poor light from an overgrown hedge. Evelyn removed only the diseased wood. Heavier pruning in winter would shock an old tree. She marked 3 branches for later work and showed Miriam how to clean the cut surfaces. In return, Miriam lent her the handcart and gave her potatoes, onions, and a jar of dripping. By sunset, Evelyn had enough food for several days and another bundle of roof boards. More important, one person in Alderwick had entered Briarbank without contempt. The threads across both gates remained unbroken. Inside the glasshouse, Evelyn inspected the rose's raised bed. The brick edging had been repaired recently, but the mortar concealed older ironwork beneath it. She removed loose soil with a hand fork and exposed a narrow grating running below the rootstock. One root had grown through the iron bars. Evelyn followed it beneath the bench until it disappeared into a ceramic pipe angled toward the western wall. The rose was not drawing all its nourishment from the bed. Its strongest root passed into another space. She checked the exterior wall. No pipe emerged outside. Returning with a lamp, she measured the direction by sight. The pipe ran beneath the tiled floor toward the remains of the old boiler house. Yet the boiler room shown on the property plan was 6 feet shorter than the distance she had measured. Someone had built a concealed propagation pit between the glasshouse and boiler house. On the ceramic pipe, hidden beneath soil, Evelyn found another crescent cut. Below it were 4 freshly scratched words. Beatrice's daughter will know. The words had been cut with a narrow blade, not scratched by accident. The pale ceramic beneath them showed no dirt, which meant the message was recent. Evelyn examined every letter before replacing the soil. The hand was controlled but uneven, as if the writer's fingers had stiffened while working. She copied the message into Arthur's old memorandum book, along with the pipe's direction and depth. Someone had expected her inheritance. That raised a question Evelyn could not answer. Who had known Arthur would leave Briarbank to her? She spent the next 3 days dividing her time between investigation and repair. The snow softened under a pale sun, revealing more damage than it concealed. The fallen beech limb had crushed nearly a third of the glasshouse roof. 2 iron rafters were bent, and the central ridge leaned dangerously. Evelyn marked that section with red cloth and did not enter it again. The eastern bay could be saved. She removed loose glass from the lower frames, sorted intact panes by size, and reset 14 of them with putty purchased from the village. Where glass was missing, she fixed oiled canvas across wooden battens. The work did not restore the glasshouse, but it created one enclosed section, protected from wind. She moved the rose's forcing frame into that bay without disturbing its roots, packed straw around the raised bed, and pruned only the damaged tips. The young flowering cane had been grafted to an old stock of unusual vigor. Even its finest roots remained white beneath the bark, untouched by frost. No rose Evelyn knew should have endured such neglect. Miriam brought two neighbors whose fruit trees required attention. One paid Evelyn 8 pence to treat canker in a pear tree. The other offered eggs and a sack of turnips in exchange for pruning instructions. Neither entered the glasshouse, and both avoided speaking Sir Rowland's name. The earnings were small, but Evelyn used them to buy another candle, lamp oil, and a sheet of tin for the cottage roof. Each evening, she recorded what she had spent. Briarbank still owed more than she could earn before the rates came due, but it had begun producing something besides cold and fear. Gideon Price returned on the fourth afternoon. He inspected the repaired panes from the gate. "You have misunderstood the situation. I understand that you damaged my chain." "You cannot prove that." "Then we understand each other." Price opened his document case. Sir Rowland's offer had increased from £15 to £25. In addition, Evelyn would receive written protection from any claim concerning plant stock removed from Vane's nursery. "Protection from an accusation not yet made," Evelyn said. "How considerate. Your mother ignored similar advice." Evelyn's restraint nearly failed. What did Sir Rowland's father do to her? He defended his property. By destroying her reputation? By telling the truth before she could profit from his work. Evelyn stepped closer. If the rose belongs to Sir Rowland, why has he waited 7 years to retrieve it? Price's eyes moved toward the western wall. Only for an instant, but it told Evelyn what he feared she might find. She refused the offer. Before leaving, Price warned that the parish could seize Briarbank for unpaid rates, and that Sir Rowland was prepared to purchase it at auction. That evening, Evelyn studied the old conveyance attached to her deed. It described the cottage, glasshouse, orchard, potting sheds, and boiler house. The western boundary measured 86 yards from the lane. Evelyn measured it herself, with a length of garden cord marked at 3-foot intervals. The deed was correct. The building plan was not. The boiler house appeared 6 feet shorter on paper because its rear wall had been drawn in the wrong position. The concealed propagation pit occupied the missing space without altering the property boundary. She entered the boiler house with a lamp. The boiler had been stripped of its brass fittings, but its brick base remained. Behind the firebox, soot covered a rectangular iron plate secured by 4 bolts. 3 were rusted solid. The 4th had been removed recently and replaced by hand. Evelyn touched it. The metal was clean. She could not shift the plate alone. Miriam's handcart helped her bring Samuel Dace, the village blacksmith, from Alderwick the next morning. He charged 1 shilling to loosen the bolts and warned that he would not be blamed if the old brickwork collapsed. They worked slowly, bracing the firebox before drawing the plate forward. Behind it ran a narrow ash-cleaning passage descending beneath the glasshouse. Cold air rose from below, carrying the dry smell of charcoal and old earth. Samuel held the lamp through the opening. The passage ended at a sunken room lined with white tiles. Rows of zinc plant cases stood on shelves above the floor, protected from damp by blocks of slate. Most were closed. One case had been opened recently. Its lid lay on the tiles, and beside it rested a woman's gardening glove, still dark with fresh soil. Then, from somewhere beneath the glasshouse, a door closed. Samuel raised his hammer and moved between Evelyn and the opening. "Someone is down there. Someone who knows another way out," Evelyn said. The sound had come from beyond the tiled room, not from the ash passage. Samuel widened the opening enough for them to enter without dislodging the brickwork. He went first with the lamp, testing each step before placing his weight upon it. The underground room was larger than Evelyn expected. Its ceiling curved beneath the western glasshouse beds, supported by brick arches. Narrow ventilation shafts rose between the benches above. A dry channel ran along the floor, while perforated ceramic pipes connected 3 deep propagation beds to the glasshouse. The winter rose's rootstock grew from the nearest bed. Its main roots spread through dark soil below, protected from severe frost by the surrounding earth. A single runner passed through the ceramic pipe to the raised bed above. Someone had grafted the crimson rose onto that runner as a signal. The bloom had survived because the hidden rootstock sustained it. Samuel examined the far end of the room. A small service door stood open, revealing steps that climbed toward the rusted western gate. Their visitor had escaped before Evelyn entered. Outside, fresh tracks crossed the thawing snow. One heel dragged slightly, leaving a shallow line behind it. The trail reached the road and disappeared among cart marks. Evelyn returned to the chamber. 22 zinc cases stood on slate blocks. Each bore a painted number, though damp and age had erased several. They were not ordinary plant carriers. Thin layers of charcoal and wax insulated their lids, protecting the contents from moisture and sudden temperature changes. The open case was numbered 14. Inside lay fresh straw, a pruning knife, and an empty clay pot. The soil pressed into its bottom matched the root bed. Whatever plant had occupied it had been removed recently. Evelyn examined the closed cases without opening them. Some rattled faintly when moved, suggesting packets or instruments rather than living plants. Others were too heavy to lift. On the tiled wall, hand-painted lines recorded temperatures and planting dates. 2 sets of initials appeared beside the early entries, B.H. and E.V. Beatrice Hale, Evelyn whispered. And Vane? Samuel asked. Ephraim Vane, Sir Rowland's father. The dates began in 1863, when Evelyn was 8, and ended 3 years later, shortly before her mother disappeared. A work table occupied the driest corner. Its drawers held broken pencils, labels, and brittle lengths of grafting twine. Evelyn found no complete notebooks. Someone had emptied the fitted spaces where record books should have rested. Beneath a stack of blotting paper lay a printer's proof for an old nursery catalog. It announced a collection of hardy rootstocks developed for northern orchards. Beatrice Hale's name appeared beside Ephraim Vane's in the heading. A thick blue line had been drawn through hers. Miriam's account of theft now looked very different. Beatrice had not been a servant stealing from her employer. She had worked beside him, and someone had later attempted to remove her from the printed record. Samuel read the proof slowly. This may explain why Rowland wants the cases. It explains why he fears them. It does not prove who owned the work. Evelyn wrapped the catalog sheet in clean cloth. She asked Samuel to witness the numbered cases and the markings on the wall before they touched anything else. Case 9 contained dried root samples tied to zinc labels. Case 11 held sealed seed envelopes marked with dates and cross numbers. Case 17 contained glass slides and a brass measuring instrument. The plant material was historical evidence, not ready wealth. Most seeds would no longer germinate after 20 years in imperfect storage. The dried roots could identify characteristics, but only if compared with living stock. The underground beds provided that living stock. Evelyn counted 7 separate root crowns beneath the soil. 6 appeared dormant. The 7th was the vigorous plant feeding the winter rose. Each crown had been planted at a measured interval and connected to a different section above. The layout was deliberate. Near the service door, Samuel found a small albumin photograph wedged behind a loose tile. It showed a young Beatrice standing outside Briarbank's Glasshouse beside another woman in gardening clothes. Between them stood a girl of 10 holding a clay pot. Evelyn recognized her own face. A childhood memory returned with startling force. Warm brick beneath her palm, the smell of damp charcoal, and her mother telling her to count 7 beds before turning toward the light. Someone had torn the photograph across one corner, removing whatever had been written there. But a few words remained on the back in Beatrice's hand. For Evelyn, when she is free to claim. The final word was missing. A second piece of paper had been folded behind the photograph. It was newer, written in blue pencil rather than faded ink. Evelyn opened it. Mrs. Marlowe, Arthur bought Briarbank because I asked him to. If you want the truth about your mother, find me before Price does. The note gave no name, only a place and time. St. Anne's Churchyard. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock. Evelyn reached St. Anne's churchyard shortly before 4. Snow lay between the graves, blue in the failing light. No one waited near the chapel, but fresh tracks led behind a row of yew trees. The woman standing there was nearly 60, broad-shouldered beneath a gardener's coat, with iron-gray hair tucked under a plain hat. Her left heel dragged when she stepped forward. Evelyn recognized her from the photograph. "You stood beside my mother at Briarbank. My name is Nora Ainsley. Beatrice and I worked together for 9 years. You made the recent graft." Nora nodded. "I needed you to notice the crescent." She explained that Briarbank had been Beatrice's experimental ground. Ephraim Vane supplied capital and access to commercial nurseries, while Beatrice developed hardy rootstocks capable of surviving northern winters and diseased soil. Nora kept the plants, recorded trials, and managed the underground propagation beds. When Beatrice disappeared, Ephraim claimed every successful cross as Vane property. Nora hid the cases before he could remove them. Dr. Sayer later purchased Briarbank and allowed her to continue tending the surviving stock in secret. "Why did Arthur buy it?" Evelyn asked. "Dr. Sayer's creditors were preparing to sell. I wrote to your husband because Briarbank had always been intended for you." "Arthur never told me. He meant to after the conveyance was secure. Then he became ill." Grief moved through Evelyn with a new edge. Arthur had known enough to protect the property, but not enough time had remained for him to explain it. "Did my mother abandon me?" Nora looked toward the dark church windows. "She sent me one letter after she vanished. She wrote that returning would place you in danger. She promised another explanation when she was safe. Did it come?" "No." Nora unfastened a canvas bundle. Inside lay a dormant plant crown packed in damp moss, its thick roots pale and sound. "This was in case 14. I removed it before Vane's men could search Briarbank. Your mother called it H14. The winter rose was grafted onto its sister stock. Why is it important? It survived ground sickness that killed every ordinary apple and pear root we planted beside it. Beatrice believed small orchards could be established on exhausted tenant land. But belief is not proof. The complete trial record is missing." A voice came from the path. "Then you admit taking it." Gideon Price emerged with a parish constable and a younger man carrying legal papers. Nora closed the canvas around the root. Price addressed the constable. "Miss Ainsley has confessed to removing valuable stock developed at Vane's Imperial Nurseries. It came from Briarbank," Evelyn said, "after Miss Hale stole the original material. You have shown no evidence of theft." Price's gaze remained on the bundle. "Hand it over, and Sir Roland will take no action against either of you." Nora's face tightened. "He has waited 20 years to destroy that root." The constable shifted uneasily. "Plant ownership sounds like a matter for solicitors, Mr. Price. I have no warrant to take it." Price turned to Evelyn. "Do you claim the plant as yours?" The safer answer was no. Nora had removed it before Evelyn inherited Briarbank. Denying responsibility might protect the property from Vane's claim and leave Nora alone to face it. Evelyn remembered Miriam saying she had believed what was safest. "Yes," she said. "Miss Ainsley preserved it on behalf of Briarbank's owner. Arthur authorized her work, and I continue that authorization." Nora drew a folded letter from her coat. Arthur's signature appeared beneath a request that she prepare the nursery for transfer to Evelyn. The constable read it and returned it. "No theft I can act upon here." Price's courtesy vanished. The younger man handed Evelyn 2 notices. The first demanded that she cease selling, moving, grafting, or concealing any disputed plant material. The second informed her that Sir Roland had petitioned the parish to enforce Briarbank's unpaid rates without further delay. "If the debt remains unpaid," Price said, "the parish may seize goods from the property. Plants are goods, Mrs. Marlowe." That evening, Evelyn brought the notices to Mr. Pell. He warned that answering Vane's claim would require documents, witnesses, and money. His smallest retainer was £1 5 shillings. Evelyn had 3 shillings and 4pence. She walked to a pawnbroker before closing and removed her wedding ring. Arthur's name and the date of their marriage were engraved inside. The broker offered £1 8 shillings. It was less than the ring was worth, and enough for Pell to file a response. Evelyn accepted. When she returned to Briarbank, Nora was waiting beside the cottage fire with the H14 crown protected in a clay pot. Evelyn placed the pawn ticket beneath Arthur's photograph and tried not to look at the pale band around her finger. Outside, someone hammered a notice to the gate. 10 days remained before the parish could begin taking Briarbank apart. During the 10 days that followed, Evelyn and Nora documented everything they could. They numbered the 7 living root crowns, measured their positions, sketched their bark and branching habits, and copied every surviving mark from the underground tiles. Samuel witnessed the inventory. Miriam kept duplicate pages beneath the floor of her cottage. The work did not stop the village rumors. Sir Rowland's employees were told that Evelyn possessed diseased plants capable of infecting Alderwick's commercial nurseries. 2 neighbors cancelled pruning work. Mrs. Rudge served Evelyn at the grocer's counter, but placed her coins in vinegar before touching them. Nora laughed when she heard. Vane's own catalogue once advertised these stocks as resistant to ground sickness. Do you remember the catalogue? I remember packing it. I do not have a copy. Without income, Evelyn could not pay the rates. Mr. Pell filed her legal response, but warned that it did not suspend the parish's right to recover its debt. On the 10th morning, a bailiff arrived with 2 assistants and a parish clerk. Gideon Price followed in a separate carriage. The bailiff read the authority aloud. Movable goods could be taken, held, and sold if Evelyn failed to pay the £2 14 shillings plus costs. The cottage and land were not yet for sale, but anything not fixed to them could be inventoried. Price pointed immediately toward the boiler house. The zinc cases are movable. They contain evidence in a disputed claim, Evelyn said. Evidence does not cease being property. Mr. Pell had not arrived. The bailiff refused to wait for him. Evelyn produced her copied inventory and asked that every item be recorded before removal. The parish clerk agreed, though Price objected to the delay. One by one, the assistants carried the zinc cases through the ash passage. Cases 9, 11, and 17 went first. Evelyn watched the physical history of her mother's work disappear into the bailiff's cart. Dried roots, seed packets, glass slides, labels, and instruments. Price inspected each number before it was loaded. The rooted propagation beds could not be seized without damaging the property. The potted H14 crown was different. Nora stood in front of it. That plant will die in a warehouse. The debt concerns Mrs. Marlowe, the bailiff said. Do not interfere. Evelyn could have hidden the crown before they came. She had refused because concealment would support Vane's accusation. Now honesty placed the living specimen in his reach. She wrapped the roots herself, adding damp moss and ventilation holes to the crate. If the plant survived, she might recover it later. If Price bought it at the parish sale, it would vanish behind Vane's walls. The cottage table, 2 chairs, spare blankets, and most of the remaining coal were added to the inventory. Arthur's photograph had no value and remained beside the empty grate. The last cases were too large for the ash passage. Price ordered the assistants to lever the iron plate wider. Samuel stepped forward. That brick base supports the western floor. The opening has already been altered, Price said. Not to that width. The bailiff hesitated, but Price reminded him that unnecessary delay would increase costs charged to Evelyn. An assistant drove an iron bar between the plate and brickwork. The first crack sounded beneath the glasshouse. Evelyn shouted for everyone to move. Samuel pulled Nora away from the passage as a section of the boiler base folded inward. Above them, the western propagation bed dropped several inches. Tiles split across the underground ceiling. Then the beech limb shifted. Its weight drove through the weakened central ridge. Iron rafters twisted, panes burst in a glittering sheet, and the western glasshouse floor collapsed into the chamber. Soil, brick, and broken benches buried 4 of the 7 root crowns. The winter rose snapped at the graft. When the noise ended, Evelyn was kneeling beneath Samuel's coat, shielded from falling glass. Blood ran from a cut along her temple. Nora's wrist was badly bruised, but no bone appeared broken. The bailiff cancelled further removal and ordered everyone out. Price looked at the ruined glasshouse, then at the carts already loaded with cases. "This is the result of neglect." Samuel seized his coat. "You were warned." Price pulled free and left with the seized goods before Mr. Pell arrived. By dusk, snow had begun falling through the open roof. Evelyn climbed into the wreckage, despite the surveyor's warning. The crimson rose lay severed among shattered panes. Beneath it, the old rootstock remained anchored in the collapsed bed, but 3 main roots had been torn apart. As Evelyn packed soil around the exposed crown, she noticed that the broken roots did not match. One bore the pale, fibrous structure of rose stalk. Another was heavier, with the scent of applewood. The third showed pear bark beneath its damaged surface. They had not grown from one plant. Beatrice had grafted several species onto a shared underground system, using the rose as a visible marker. The 7 beds were not 7 experiments. Together, they formed one experiment, and the arrangement itself was the missing record. Evelyn worked until her hands lost feeling. She cut the damaged roots cleanly, packed them in damp moss, and moved every recoverable piece into the protected eastern bay. Nora prepared pots, while Samuel covered the collapsed beds with boards and canvas. The crimson bloom could not be saved, but 3 buds remained below the broken graft. By morning, Evelyn had separated enough of the root system to understand its design. Beatrice had used inarching, joining young plants while both remained rooted. A hardy hawthorn nurse stock supplied strength through poor soil. Quince served as an intermediate bridge for pear. Crabapple supported the apple trials. The unions were not meant to create one impossible species. They formed a temporary network that sustained vulnerable trees until each developed roots strong enough to survive alone. The rose was an indicator. If its delicate graft bloomed during winter, sap was moving through the entire chain. Evelyn compared the root junctions with the measurements she had copied before the collapse. The 7 beds represented 7 stages of the method: nurse stock, bridge graft, fruiting scion, diseased soil exposure, winter stress, separation, and recovery. Their spacing recorded the length of each trial. The painted temperature lines provided the conditions. The chamber itself was Beatrice's missing record. Price had removed the cases, but he could not carry away the architecture, the rooted beds, or Evelyn's knowledge of what the plants revealed. Nora returned from her cottage that afternoon with a metal dispatch box. "I should have shown you this sooner." Inside was Beatrice's only surviving letter, written from London in February 1867. The paper had split along its folds, but the writing remained clear. Beatrice described Ephraim Vane's attempt to claim the winter root system as his sole invention. When she refused to sign away her work, he accused her of stealing plants and threatened to prosecute Evelyn's father as an accomplice. He also warned that the scandal would leave 11-year-old Evelyn without a respectable home. Beatrice left Alderwick to protect her family, while she sought witnesses and duplicate records. "I did not leave because my child was a burden," she had written. "I left because Vane discovered she was the only thing I could be made to fear for." Evelyn stopped reading. For 20 years, she had imagined her mother choosing ambition over her. The truth did not return those years, but it removed the shame Beatrice had never placed upon her. The letter named 3 witnesses: Nora, Dr. Sayer, and a printer who had prepared the original joint catalogue. It also stated that a sealed packet containing trial drawings, the partnership agreement, and Beatrice's statement had been deposited with the Alderwick Agricultural Society. "Did anyone search there?" Evelyn asked. "Ephraim did," Nora said. The secretary told him no packet existed. Was he protecting it? Or it had already been moved? At the bottom of the letter, Beatrice instructed Nora to preserve 7 living crowns and mark the successful stock with a winter rose. Ownership of her share in the partnership, along with the experimental stock, was to pass to Evelyn when she reached 21. The letter alone could not convey land or conclusively establish title. But combined with the catalog proof, Arthur's authorization, Nora's testimony, the photograph, and any surviving partnership record, it could expose the lie beneath Vane's claim. Mr. Pell arrived before dusk. He had learned that the seized cases would be offered at a parish sale in 5 days. Sir Rowland had already registered his intention to bid. Evelyn showed him Beatrice's letter. Pell read the reference to the Agricultural Society twice. Its old records were transferred when the society merged with the County Horticultural Institute. The packet may now be in Westbridge. Can you request it? I can request a search. We will need more than a family letter if Vane disputes ownership. Evelyn gave him the copied case inventory and her diagrams of the 7 beds. Each seed envelope number corresponded to a root union beneath the glasshouse. Beatrice's initials appeared beside the earliest trials. Ephraim's were added later. Vane's greatest mistake had been leaving the living experiment at Briarbank, while claiming its contents came from elsewhere. That night, Evelyn examined the most damaged section of nurse stock. Beneath the torn bark, a thin green line remained. She cut 3 short pieces, matched them to healthy hawthorn seedlings Nora had brought, and made emergency grafts using Beatrice's crescent method. The work would not reveal success immediately. Callus required time. Spring remained months away. Yet one proof did not need to wait. Evelyn opened the old Vane nursery advertisement Nora had remembered. Miriam found a copy lining a trunk in her attic. The illustration of the Vane Winter Foundation stock showed 7 beds, a rose marker, and the same sequence Beatrice had built underground. Beneath the image, Sir Rowland's father had printed a boast, protected by a method known only to this establishment. Evelyn placed Beatrice's dated letter beside it. The method had never been Vane's secret. It had been her mother's signature. Mr. Pell obtained a temporary stay less than 2 hours before the parish sale. Because ownership of the seized plant material was disputed, the county court agreed to hear the matter before the cases could be sold. The hearing was held in Alderwick's public hall 3 days later, with the zinc cases arranged along one wall under the bailiff's supervision. Sir Rowland Vane attended in person. He was taller than Evelyn expected, silver-haired and carefully dressed, with the composed expression of a man accustomed to presenting profit as public service. Gardeners, seed packers, tenant farmers, and village tradesmen filled the benches behind him. Sir Rowland's solicitor argued that Beatrice Hale had been Ephraim Vane's employee. Any rootstock she developed, he claimed, belonged to Vane's nursery. Briarbank merely concealed material she had removed without permission. The catalog proof naming Beatrice as a partner was dismissed as an unapproved draft. Then the County Horticultural Institute delivered its search results. The sealed packet had not been kept under Beatrice's name. Dr. Sayer had deposited it in 1867 under the experimental designation H14. The Institute's clerk brought the original register showing the date of receipt and an unbroken wax seal. The judge ordered the packet opened. Inside were Beatrice's trial drawings, her signed statement, and a partnership agreement between Beatrice Hale and Ephraim Vane. It granted each an equal interest in the winter root method and its commercial proceeds. 3 witnesses had signed: Nora Ainsley, Dr. Julian Sayer, and the catalog printer. A separate clause assigned Beatrice's share to Evelyn. Sir Rowland's solicitor requested time to examine the signatures. "You have had 20 years, Nora said from the witness bench. The judge warned her to answer only questions, but a murmur of approval passed through the hall. Evelyn then explained the surviving experiment. She used her diagrams of the 7 beds to show how Beatrice had joined nurse roots, intermediate stocks, and fruiting scions through inarching. The rose was not the valuable crop. It was the visible indicator that the underground chain remained active during severe cold. Sir Rowland rose. A widow's interpretation of damaged roots is not scientific proof. Evelyn had expected that objection. She asked the bailiff to open cases 9, 11, and 17. The dried root samples in case 9 carried cross numbers matching the ceramic collars beneath Briarbank. The seed envelopes in case 11 corresponded to the dates painted on the chamber wall. The brass caliper in case 17 bore Beatrice's crescent and initials beneath a later vein inventory mark. Sir Rowland had insisted that the cases be seized as vein property. In doing so, he had preserved and delivered the comparison evidence himself. Miriam testified that she had packed the original joint catalogues before Beatrice's name was removed. Samuel described the warning Price ignored before the Glasshouse collapse. The bailiff confirmed that Price had demanded the boiler opening be widened, despite concerns about the supports. Gideon Price claimed he had acted only to assist the parish. "Did Sir Rowland instruct you to obtain the H14 stock?" Mr. Pell asked. Price looked toward his employer. The same reflex that had betrayed him at Briarbank did so again. The judge found that Vane had not established sole ownership of the plants. The seized cases were ordered returned to Evelyn, subject only to the unpaid parish debt. Vane's claim against Nora was dismissed. More damaging still, the partnership agreement required an accounting of profits earned from the winter root method. Sir Rowland's own catalogues showed that Vane's nursery had sold the stock for 18 years while paying nothing to Beatrice or her heir. That accounting would require a separate proceeding, but the court restrained Vane from selling the stock as his exclusive invention or destroying related records. The judge also directed that Evelyn's claim for structural damage be heard with evidence from Samuel and the bailiff. Sir Rowland left through a side door before the hall emptied. Price followed without his document case. Outside, no crowd suddenly declared Evelyn a genius. Several Vane employees avoided her eyes, uncertain whether their livelihoods were threatened. Mrs. Rudge remarked that legal ownership would not restore a collapsed roof. But 3 tenant farmers approached Evelyn about testing the method on exhausted orchard ground. The Institute's clerk requested permission to document Briarbank's surviving crowns. Samuel offered to help stabilize the eastern bay until the damage claim was settled. Miriam placed a small envelope in Evelyn's hand. Inside were £2 14 shillings, the exact unpaid rates. 23 villagers had contributed. Some gave a shilling, others gave pennies. Each name and amount was written on the paper. "This is not charity," Miriam said. "It is an advance on trees you will teach us to grow." Evelyn paid the parish clerk before leaving the hall. The bailiff removed the seizure marks from the zinc cases and returned their keys. For the first time since Arthur's funeral, nothing stood between Evelyn and the property he had protected for her. At Briarbank, she carried case 14 into the eastern bay. Beneath the canvas covering her emergency grafts, a line of pale callus had begun forming around the crescent cuts. The union was holding. The first winter at Briarbank ended without a miracle. The emergency grafts survived, but 2 of the 7 original crowns died from damage caused by the collapse. The cottage remained cold, and the western glasshouse was judged beyond repair. Evelyn, Nora, and Samuel spent the remaining winter months stabilizing the eastern bay and protecting the underground beds from rain. No one pretended that justice could replace iron, glass, timber, and labor. The accounting of Vane's profits took nearly a year. Surviving catalogs, sales books, and correspondence showed that the nursery had marketed Beatrice's winter root method under several names. The court ordered Sir Rowland to pay Beatrice's estate its contractual share, along with compensation for damage caused during the seizure. The settlement was substantial, but not limitless. Evelyn divided it carefully. First came the cottage roof, chimney, pump, and unpaid legal costs. Samuel then rebuilt 3 glasshouse bays on the sound eastern foundations. The collapsed western section was cleared rather than imitated, leaving an open nursery yard above the restored underground beds. Work continued for 18 months. Sir Rowland lost his position on the county horticultural committee and the right to advertise Beatrice's work as exclusively Vane's. Gideon Price was dismissed after the bailiff's report, and Samuel's testimony established that he had ignored the structural warning. Vane's nursery survived, but its catalogues were required to identify Beatrice Hale as co-developer of the winter root method. Neither man visited Briarbank again. Lady Honora wrote after reading about the case in the newspaper. She congratulated Evelyn on recovering a fortunate commercial asset and invited her to call when next in town. Evelyn sent a courteous refusal. With her first payment from the settlement, she redeemed her wedding ring. She wore it not as proof that she remained Arthur's widow, but as a reminder that he had believed Briarbank should reach her, even when he lacked time to explain why. Mr. Pell continued searching for Beatrice's final years. County and consular records eventually traced her to a small nursery outside Rotterdam, where she had worked under her maiden name after leaving England. She died of fever in 1869 while preparing to return to Alderwick. There was no second family and no deliberate abandonment. Among the Dutch nursery's archived correspondence, Pell found a letter Beatrice had written but never posted. It contained no new invention or legal proof, only instructions for Evelyn's education, questions about her health, and the hope that her daughter might one day enter a garden without being told which work was unsuitable for a woman. Evelyn kept that letter beside Arthur's photograph. Briarbank's future depended upon work rather than recovered money. Evelyn and Nora propagated healthy nurse stocks and established controlled trials in 3 tenant orchards. They did not promise instant results. Each plot included untreated trees for comparison, and every planting was measured through frost, drought, and replant sickness. After 3 years, enough evidence existed to sell the stock responsibly. The Briarbank Orchard Cooperative offered roots and training at prices small farmers could afford. Members paid partly in money and partly through labor, fruit, or replacement seedlings. Profits maintained the Glasshouse, funded new trials, and supported widows who trained in propagation and nursery accounting. Miriam kept the cooperative's subscription book. Samuel maintained the ironwork and refused every attempt to call him an architect. Nora directed the underground beds until her injured heel made the stairs difficult, after which Evelyn built her a workbench in the eastern bay. Mrs. Rudge continued to place Evelyn's coins in a separate dish, though she stopped dipping them in vinegar. Not every villager became an admirer. Evelyn preferred honest skepticism to fashionable praise. By the 4th winter, young apple and pear trees grown on Beatrice's system stood in orchards once considered exhausted. Their harvests were still modest, but the trees lived. Families who had depended entirely upon purchased fruit began storing their own. Briarbank employed 8 people through the year, and twice that number during grafting season. It never became an ornamental estate. The cottage remained plain. The nursery smelled of soil and wax, and rain still found weaknesses in the oldest roof. It was useful, solvent, and alive. On a December morning, Evelyn entered the eastern bay before sunrise. Frost silvered the outside glass, but the restored panes held. Beneath a forcing frame, the rose graft saved from the collapse had opened its first crimson bloom in 4 years. Nora stood beside it, holding Beatrice's grafting knife. "You should make the mark," she said. Evelyn took the knife and cut a careful crescent into the wax beside the successful union. Around her, apprentices recorded temperatures, checked labels, and prepared nurse stocks for spring. The mark no longer needed to be hidden. Beyond the glasshouse, rows of young orchard trees waited in the winter earth, carrying Beatrice's work toward farms she had never lived to see, and her daughter's name into a future no one else would be permitted to claim.